So here's the problem. When I was making these small boxes, I had to make very thin pieces of wood for the walls of the boxes. Now I found it was hard with the hand plane to do this and to do it so that all the walls were uniform in the same size. But today, I want to show you how I solved that problem by creating this hand plane thicknessing jig. Let's take a look at it. So here's the plan. The jig is going to have three pieces to it, three main pieces. It'll have a base piece, seen here, and two sidewall pieces. These sidewall pieces will have grooves cut out of them. A couple things to take note about the grooves is that the bottom of the groove will align perfectly with the top of this base piece, giving you a flat surface all the way across. Second thing is that the distance between the width between two sidewalls will be just wide enough for whatever plane body you're using. That will allow the plane body to ride nicely between a track. Another thing to consider is that the width of the base you will want to be ever so slightly smaller than the width of your plane iron. I have an exaggerated example here. We have our base, two sidewalls, and a plane iron. You'll see I've drawn a slight chamfer because I use a chamfer on my plane irons, and that the base is ever so slightly smaller than this chamfer on the blade iron. This will give me the full cutting surface of the blade iron. So how this works in action is that these two sidewall pieces will be able to move independently from the base. If we move both of these sidewall pieces up from the bottom, using the bottom as a reference, let's say 1/8 of an inch, we will know that what is left between the bottom of the groove and the base to be a 1/8 inch empty void space that we'll be able to place a piece of wood, continue to take shavings with the plane iron until it's no longer taking shavings because the edge of the plane is resting on these top grooves, and what will hopefully be left is a piece of wood that is 1/8 inch thick all the way across. So that's the plan. I've gone ahead and I've milled up three component pieces, base piece and two sidewall pieces. And I have to go and cut in the grooves to each of these pieces, so that's what we're going to do first. To cut the grooves, you'll first need to accurately transfer the height of the base piece onto each sidewall. I used a marking gauge, but you could also use a ruler or combination square as well. If I were to make this again, I would actually set my marking gauge slightly longer than the base piece, and you'll see why later on. With the marking gauge set, you could use it to lay out the bottom of the groove on the side wall. To determine the depth of the groove, I took the width of the plane minus the width of my base piece, and then divided this value by 2 to get me the depth of the groove. With everything laid out, you can now cut the groove. There are many ways to do this, but I chose to do this by hand. I started by using a chisel to pare against the bottom layout line of the groove, which leaves the tiniest of a wedge shape and establishes a slight wall that I can work against. With my tiny wall established, I can then take my router plane and very carefully remove a tiny bit of wood, taking care not to dig into the sidewall. After a couple of passes of doing this, and with the sidewall more established, I could then begin taking heavier cuts. I kept taking passes until I reached my other layout line, all the while thinking about how I should make a plow plane that would probably make this a whole lot quicker and easier. With the groove cut, I could place both pieces in my clamp so that the bottoms are aligned, and then place my chisel flat against the base piece and level off the groove. This is why before, when I was setting my marking gauge, I mentioned if I was to build this again, I would leave that mark a little proud so that at this stage I could pare away the waste and ensure it's flush with the base piece. Then do the same for the other side, and now you have a nice little track for your plane to ride in. With that done, I can move on to laying out the screw holes. Here I'm setting my combination square to a point just below the top of the base piece. You can then take that measurement and using the bottom of the side piece as a reference, make a mark on the side piece. I then took my best guess at spacing out 3 marks along the side piece. With the marks transferred to both side pieces, you can then clamp everything together, ensuring that everything is flat against the bench top. The piece is clamped, you can then drill a hole in your mark through the sidewall piece and into the base piece. What this is doing is ensuring that the two holes are now aligned perfectly with one another. With this initial hole drilled, we are now going to create a mortise that will allow a screw or bolt to ride freely inside. Begin by drawing a line straight down from the previously drilled hole. Then draw another line just above the bottom of the sidewall. Here I've picked a drill bit that is just barely thicker than the screw I'll be using as a fastener. Then, using a drill or drill press, you can remove the waste following the line you previously drew. This doesn't have to be perfect, and alternatively, you could lay out a mortise like you normally would and skip drilling out the waste. However, I just got this new drill press and wanted an excuse to use it, so I went this route. With the holes drilled, you can then use a marking knife to lay out the walls, which you could have done before, but I chose to do after. And then grab your chisel and remove the rest of the waste. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect. With the waste removed, you can now have a nice mortise hole that the screw can easily slide between. You can repeat the same process for the remaining 5 holes and be left with 6 total holes for fasteners to slide through. To use the jig, you take a combination square and set it to the thickness you want. Then, using the bottom as a reference, take the sidewall piece and butt it up against the square and secure it in place. Repeat the same process for the other fastener at the opposite end. Then finally fasten down the remaining middle piece and repeat the process for the other side. For the stop block, I did the same process as before, and you can see the final result here. You'll want to place the stop block just below the 2 sidewall pieces so your plane doesn't run up against it, and then fasten this down as well. With everything secure, you can then place the whole jig into your bench vise. Place the piece of wood into the jig, grab your plane and add a little wax, then begin taking shavings, letting the piece ride along the track. You'll then keep taking shavings until finally the plane is no longer taking any shavings, at which point you now have a piece of wood that is hopefully uniform in thickness. So there you go, that's how I made this hand plane thicknessing jig. I hope it was helpful to you, maybe inspired you to go make your own. I know for me, I'm excited to have this. I already have some projects in mind that I know this is going to be very useful to have. Now, when I've been using it, I've noticed that there's a tendency for the cut to kind of tilt or skew to one side. However, the beauty with using a hand plane is that I can account for that tilt by just adjusting the plane iron until I've adjusted out that tilt. Kind of like you would when using a shooting board, which is just pretty cool with the nature of hand planes and this jig. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know what you think in the comments below about it. If you have any questions, any advice, I really do love hearing those, reading those, and getting to learn from you guys. So, there you have it. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.